All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we will have an interactive workshop on inclusive collaborations in the classrooms. I believe that everyone knows this is a really important topic right now, not only for research, but also for teaching. So today, we're gonna have some idea sharing, some dialogue on this issue. My name is Tony Khan. I'm an associate professor of management and a faculty director of Bishop Center for Ethical Leadership at the University of South Florida. I'm very happy to organize this event. And this is part of the series of events for OB Division at the Academy of Management. For today's agenda, we have an hour and a half this morning to talk about how to develop and manage inclusive research collaborations and how to promote an inclusive environment for student learning. So I'm very happy to have 4 outstanding scholars and also speakers to share their insights and ideas today. I give them 15 minutes each to talk about anything they feel is important for collaborations and teaching and student learning. So these speakers are Mary Graham, Michele Williams, Katina Sawyer, and Christian Thoroughgood. And after their presentations, we'll have a dialogue among all of us. So at that time, feel free to share insights, questions, anything you have in your mind. You can type your question in the chat if you don't want to show your face, or you can raise your hand, I can call your name, and then you can talk on video or on voice. Again, today the session is pretty informal and we want to have more meaningful and a good dialogue rather than have a lecture today. So Mary is a professor of sport management at Syracuse University. She published a lot of good work on industrial relations and also gender diversity in sport field. Michele Williams, I'm pretty sure a lot of you know Michele. She's super wonderful and helpful to our field. She's an assistant professor of management and entrepreneurship at the University of Iowa. The third speaker is Katina Sawyer. She's super energetic and is super passionate about this topic. It's always so interesting to have conversation with her on this topic. She's an assistant professor of management at George Washington University. And finally, we have Christian Thoroughgood. He recently joined Georgia State University as an assistant professor of management. I would say Christian is super helpful and passionate about diversity. And then I'm pretty sure you will learn a lot from his talk as well. So welcome everyone. And without further ado, I will let Mary start her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Tony, I think... I
need to stop sharing mine.
Okay, there we go. Bear with me 1 second, sorry. I've started saying a lot.
By the way, before Mary, before you start, I want to acknowledge Jamie Boyle. Jamie is at University of South Florida, and then all those beautiful flyers and then the background work, Jamie is doing all of that. So I really want to appreciate her here and acknowledge her contributions to this session today.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks everyone for coming this morning. I assume you can see my, my slides. If not, stop me. I'd like to thank Tony for inviting me to be on this panel. I met Tony when he expertly guided a paper of mine through JOB. And today I'm going to share some small things I've tried to do to further inclusive collaborations in classrooms. And I'm well aware that others are doing incredible things in the DEI space. And I look forward to learning from the other panelists and from all of you. My focus today is on fostering an inclusive environment for learning. Much of what I could have said about inclusive research risked revealing too much information about my research mentees' personal information, but I will offer one observation. The first step in inclusive research is often saying yes to the student or junior faculty member who others have declined to work with. Not because of their capabilities, but because they are not a star. So star often means having publications, an A average, being popular, or often being white. So today I'll discuss a couple teaching approaches and classroom dynamics that I believe have enhanced inclusive environments. I'll also discuss the larger context with some examples about building and using institutional structure for this purpose. Empathetic listening. This year, I co-taught a new course entitled Race, Gender, and Diversity in Sport Organizations. And we began with a video and discussion about the concept of empathetic listening. And I will play you a brief clip, less than a minute, to give you a sense of it.
It's more than just a meal you make every night. Opinion or change their mind.
So let me ask, are you hearing the volume?
It's a little bit low volume. Can you turn up a little bit?
Yes.
Interferes with their ability to feel understood. Saying things like, oh, I understand, or, oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you about something that happened to me, can really get in the way of helping another person feel understood. Anytime you're trying to change them or convince them of something or sway their opinion, that's an indication that you're not doing a good job listening. Now, this is where a lot of people get their undies all in a bundle about listening skills. They get really frustrated. They say to me, well, what, you're saying I can never give advice or I can't help someone? And that's not the case. Of course, there's a time for advice giving. Math. It's not listening. What I'm saying is you start with listening. You start with understanding. You start with
Okay, so I hope you can, you heard that, or at a minimum, you could read the subtitles there. So why we chose to do that in this course is to set the normative tone that, you know, we can say anything in here, but at the same time, we have to give people space to have different points of view or to learn and grow. So we intentionally stayed away from suggestions to be respectful or professional, which I used to do. But I think this risks being applied more harshly to minority students and students from other underrepresented groups. So representation. So sometimes simply being the different faculty member, in my case, the faculty member who's a white woman with gray hair, and the only tenured woman full professor in a program of white men students and faculty, it really matters. My course content differs from my men peers because of who I am and my experiences and my research. And honestly, visually, I can see from looking out into the class that this makes the classroom more welcoming for the 25% of students who are women, and hopefully for the minority men too. So for the race and gender course, I requested and had approved a co-instructor adjunct line. And this is him, Chris Robinson. He's also one of my co-authors. And Chris is an alum of our program. he had minored in African American Studies at SU, and he subsequently earned his law degree. And the fact that he was in his mid-20s made it all the more well-received from every student in the class, but especially by the minority students. And while I certainly could and did teach content on race and ethnicity, there was just no substitute for having Chris in the classroom. So I'll comment that I do see the irony in the difference in statuses between Chris and I, an adjunct and a full professor. But this was the plan for funding reasons. And I am happy to say that we're currently searching for a tenure line hire for this position, but representation really matters. So on to structure. The same course I'll continue with. It's my goal to make the race, gender, and diversity in sport class required for all of our sport management majors. And I wanted to share a bit about the course's journey. So our students really need this new course to be successful in the industry. Moreover, our underrepresented students have told us that they need to have their classmates have it so that their experience in our sport management program is a more inclusive and welcoming education. So, however, our efforts have encountered opposition and setbacks rooted in department politics, the ubiquitous competition for resources, and the fact that only a few faculty prioritize this content. So some structural changes to undergraduate education at SU that I'm involved with but not leading have really helped the chances for this course. So for the first time, we have a common four credit set of requirements for all of our undergraduate students, which is about maybe 15,000 students. A 1 credit diversity and identity course for first year and transfer students, and a 3 credit course in inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility that they can choose from a whole list of courses. This has been really helpful in prioritizing diversity and inclusion, and gave some momentum to our course. The other initiative I'll tell you about is the shared competencies for undergraduate education at Syracuse University. And this is something that I did lead for a couple years as a provost faculty fellow. And we don't have a general education requirement at Syracuse. And so in order to remain accredited, but also to ensure some consistency in education for our students, these are our university-wide learning goals for all undergraduates. And you can see, the ethics, integrity, and commitment to diversity and inclusion is in there. It's important that it's in there. It's in there stated publicly and clearly for the first time. And this has provided great leverage for a new required course for sport management students. So we could rely on those other 4 credits, but the idea courses, the diversity courses that are listed span so widely that it wouldn't be necessarily useful for our students. So for example, aging and society, great course. But it's not going to be on point for our major and the students' professional development. So if we're serious about our commitment to diversity, we're going to need more on that. And that's where this course comes in. So we're really, really proud of the Shared Competencies initiative. It in itself has faced, I'll say, years of discussion before it finally got implemented. So here's some of the strategies I used to leverage those structural activities to get a new required course on race and gender in sport organizations. First of all, I spent a lot of time counteracting misinformation and obfuscation. And I wouldn't mention this if this just happened one time, because, you know, as colleagues, we're all intelligent and have opinions. It deserves to be questioned. But these points that I'm sharing with you were raised over and over again over several years. So it sent us down a lot of rabbit holes. Oh, really? The content's already being taught. Well, can I see your syllabus and what you're doing in that regard? And it turned out it was very minimal, or it was very surface level, like the first woman in sport to do X, Y, and Z. The second one, the course already exists. We got a number of courses suggested that says we already do race and gender in sport organizations. But when it all came down to it, we were not already doing it. The other question that we got over and over again is, who is going to develop this thing? Like, it was very, very difficult. So I took this one personally because I was proposing the course. I have a PhD in organizational studies with a minor in gender studies, and I research diversity. So many a meeting was spent throwing names out on the table about people who could possibly teach this course, who either didn't have a background in diversity and weren't on our faculty. So I developed a syllabus and ran it by colleagues I trusted, and I just had it ready for the next time that the question was raised. So I developed the whole course, and this was a strategy that put that discussion at least to rest. So I'm sure you all have had these discussions in your faculties, but there's no room in our curriculum. And this was a frustrating one because we actually never sat down and substantively went course by course and tied it to learning goals and see where we might merge things, where we might sunset things. And so it was an extreme frustration for me. And the dominant solution that appeared to be like it was going to maybe win out was just combine it with our introductory management course. So we are a sport management program with one management course in it, and they wanted to now put the diversity and inclusion course in it. And these were all well-intentioned, sincere suggestions. But to give you an idea, our business school has a management major. Sport management is very similar to it. The business school has 5 courses in management. We have 1, and then some people wanted to combine diversity in there as well. So again, I sort of tried to be proactive, and I came up with a fact sheet on the course description for management and the course description for race, gender, and diversity. This didn't satisfy everyone, but I think if you just glance at the modules in one versus the modules in the other, you can't do justice to both in the same course. So fortunately, I'm very happy to say that this option is now off the table for now, and the new separate race and gender course seems to be on track. So here's some other things that were very important and still are to this course becoming a part of the required course curriculum for sport management students. So the Chief Diversity Officer at Syracuse University was a new position as of just 2 years ago. And Keith Alford was in that. He's outstanding, and he did so much for me to act as a sounding board when I would run into these roadblocks. He had great ideas for strategies, and I feel guilty about using him so much because he had so many things on his plate at the university, but I couldn't have done this without him and without my dean. So, and I'm not saying I did it, I'm saying we couldn't have had this course be implemented without this support too. So our dean, at my request, was very supportive of the course and intervened with several meetings where I really admire our dean, and she's very blunt. And so she, let it be known that you will do this, and here's why. Am I making myself clear? Kind of a conversation. So very strong leadership there. And I have to say, sadly, George Floyd's murder over a year ago, and the Black Lives Matter activity in Syracuse and globally really made a huge difference. It sort of dropped, the urgency sort of dropped off, but we're able to bring that up again when the course seems to be stalling a bit in terms of support, and the urgency comes back. Also at Syracuse University, you might have heard, we made the news. We've had several student protests in the last couple of years pertaining to racial diversity. And the last one was a Black-led student movement that took over our administration building for many, many weeks, and only COVID ended that. So I don't like that these are catalysts for us, and we're not using them in any sort of disingenuous way, but it really helps make the case. It's easier to make the case that our students need a course like this. And it probably doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but it's a really big deal in our program. So I'd like to end by making clear that I love what I do, and I enjoy working with my talented colleagues. I don't think my experience is an exception in terms of getting curriculum changes to support diversity and inclusion. But I think it's pretty commonplace at universities and colleges across the US. So I hope some of what I've said has been helpful to other people listening. And I really look forward to hearing from the other panelists and from all of you about this important topic.
Thank you, Mary. All right, our next speaker is Michele, and then after all four speakers finish their presentation, we will have a dialogue among all of us. So hold on your questions, and you will have a chance to speak up. Michele, can you share your slides?
Thank you so much, Tony. And thank you, Mary. That was really very helpful to see how you move that class through your university. So I am excited to be here. I'm so thrilled that Tony has invited me to present around inclusive classrooms and inclusive collaboration. I want to thank the Tiffy College of Business here at the University of Iowa and our Dean, Amy Christoph Brown, who initiated the position of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Faculty Fellow. And some of the ideas I'm going to be presented were developed in that role, and we're using them in our university here. Not forwarding, there we go. So I'm going to flip a little bit and talk about inclusive classrooms first. kind of what faculty can do and what faculty can encourage in their students, and then talk about inclusive collaboration. And I'm talking about inclusive collaboration second, because I think a lot of the same principles that make your classroom inclusive really foster inclusive collaboration in your collaborations with doctoral students and with your colleagues, both those who are more junior than you and those who are more senior than you. So I just wanted to start off with the definition of inclusion, and I'm using the definition from Society for Human Resource Management, and they define inclusion as the achievement of an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, have equal access to opportunities and resources, and can fully contribute to the organization's success. And I love this definition because when I present this at any company or any university department, everyone agrees with this, right? We all want our students to be treated fairly, to have equal opportunities, and to contribute to the organization. And so when I think of inclusion, I think of it, of the principles that we instill in our classroom as universal design, right? So everyone in the classroom is going to benefit from things that make them feel more included. It's not simply that we're including students who have been underrepresented in the past or felt excluded, but we're creating a new environment where everyone feels included. So what can we do as faculty? We can implement structures, interpersonal processes, and make sure that we're aware of accessibility issues in our presentations. So what I would like to do though today, because I only have 15 minutes, is I'm going to drill down on the interpersonal processes. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'd like to present 3 things that you could do this afternoon, that you could implement in your classroom tomorrow, that you can talk to your colleagues about, and that they could implement in their classroom fairly easily. So the 3 are research-based processes, and that's what we found very important in our university because, and in our college, because we're not just talking to people in management, right? The people in finance and accounting and economics need to buy into how we create an inclusive environment. And the 3 processes are growth mindset, microaffirmations, and dialogue. And some of these will be familiar to you, some will be new, but I'm going to go through each one, and I'm really excited about them. So these are principles that I've used in the classroom. I've taught intergroup dialogue, so how to talk across difference using the University of Michigan model. I've taught that, and I've also taught feminist perspectives on management and women in leadership, entrepreneurship, and negotiation to diverse populations. So when I look at, for instance, feminist perspectives, I don't expect everyone in the class to be feminist. I say this is a lens that we can analyze things, and let's be able to use this lens so that we can have very conservative people and more less conservative people in the same classroom to have these discussions. Okay, so growth mindset, you're probably all familiar with Carol Dweck's work. A growth mindset means that you really think about failure as an opportunity to grow. It challenges you. You can do better. Feedback is constructive, not something to get defensive about. And when our students have this type of growth mindset, we can see that in those student teams, right? When someone falls short of an expectation, a team member falls short, that team member then isn't written off forever, right? The team pulls together and helps them learn or develops new norms or new procedures to make that better the next time. They're able to come back from challenges. Fixed mindset, in contrast, is failure is the limit of my abilities, right? So I'm either good at it or bad at it. And when you think of things with a fixed mindset, think about your team member. They fail at something, they don't meet an expectation. A section of a paper isn't written up to the standards of the group, and you just write them off, right? So for the rest of the semester, if you're still working in the same team, that team member never gets anything important to do, right? Because you think that that's just the limit of their capability, as opposed to the idea that perhaps they need to have a better outline before they start, or work on structure. So it's important for our students to have growth mindset, but it's also important for our instructors to have growth mindset. And this is a fabulous study by Canning in 2019 et al. And they looked at professors in chemistry. So this is the hard science. It wasn't, the soft skills, though those are essential. And whether the professor had a growth mindset or fixed mindset. And they found that when the professor had a growth mindset, everyone in the class did better on the exams, when they measured this before the semester, and it closed the gap between underrepresented minorities and the white and Asian students. And so this is what I mean by universal design. This is a way of thinking that we can inculcate in our faculty that's going to change it's gonna move the bar for us in terms of all our students, but also in terms of equity. So the second micro process I want to talk about is micro affirmations. And this term was coined by Mary Rowe at MIT and is published. And micro affirmations are, in a sense, the opposite of micro exclusions or microaggressions. So these are small moves that make people feel seen and welcome. So things like making eye contact, using their correct name, right? Even if it's hard to pronounce, using people's preferred pronouns, right? And so these are active and proactive ways to increase microaggressions that stem from unconscious biases, right? So we are all subject to unconscious biases and they slip out, right? Especially when we're task focused. And so by making the conscious effort to affirm other people, we're overriding that, right? So we're doing something actively. And when I think about microaggressions, I think about the Zulu greeting, I see you. And when it is said in Zulu, it means, I see you as you are. I see you as you intend to be. I see you as fully human. I see you as worthy. And this is some of the feeling that comes with using a person's name or using the term we. It builds that group identity. And this idea of micro affirmations really builds on the idea of self-verification theory and the great work by Jeff Polzer, who looked at how is self-verification in team related to better performance, so people seeing other people as they see themselves, and how that relates to better integration of diverse groups. One of the things I love about this, I'm just going to tell a story. I was teaching the class that I talked about on women in leadership, and one of the activities they had to do was take research that was not about gender, look at it through a gender lens, and come up with suggestions for the researcher on what other additional questions they might ask and what things they might look into. And I had a student who was an athlete. And she didn't think of herself as a scholar, and she kind of just did enough to get by. But she did this exercise, and she did it really well. And she looked at Ethan Bernstein's work on transparency. And so I sent him her suggestions, and he wrote back to her, right? He took the time to wrote back to her. I presented it in class. I gave her the feedback. And from that moment on in class, she was one of the star students. So having someone recognize her intellect and her ability totally transformed how she showed up. And so this, we talk about this as the Pygmalion effect, but we know that when you see people, they can show up in a different way. So the third micro process that I think is really important is dialogue. And this is a conversation at uncovering assumptions and increasing interpersonal understanding. There's training for faculty and groups of leadership at universities who want to develop a dialogue program at the University of Michigan. They have a Center for Intergroup Dialogue. And Roger Fisher, who is the author of Getting to Yes and part of Harvard's program on negotiation, was part of developing that program before he passed away. Cornell University also has a strong intergroup dialogue project that's based on the Michigan model, but has some tweaks. And at Cornell, they're really looking at, can they get to a point where a third of the population of students has gone through this course, so that when situations occur, like Mary talked about at Syracuse, there's one person, at least in every group of students, who can use dialogue tactics and techniques to start to have real conversations instead of simply these polarized conversations. So I want to just talk a little bit about dialogue, because I think this is something that we really need to train our students to do and think like. So dialogue is not combative like debate is. It's not about trying to prove the other side wrong. It's not about listening just enough to find the flaws in the other person's argument, or listening just long enough to make your own counter argument. It's not about defending your position against others. It's actually a collaborative approach. So dialogue's about exploring common ground, listening to understand, find meaning and agreement, re-examine all the positions that come into the discussion. And it's admitting, which is really important, that others' thinking can improve one's own, right? So even if you disagree with someone, they may make points that make your thinking about this topic better. And searching for strengths and value in others' positions. And this is very important with the polarization that we've seen in our country and in our classroom. If we can't get people on both sides of different issues to speak to each other and understand kind of the assumptions. So what we're trying to get them to do in dialogue is really go up that ladder of inference, right? So you saw behavior, but what are those beliefs and assumptions that you're putting on top to make the argument you're making now? And on my website, I have a comparison of dialogue and debate from the Yankelovich paper there for you to download if you'd like to. So dialogue, what are 3 core requirements? Equality, right? So in your classroom, you need to it's important for people to feel equal opportunities to speak. Listening with empathy, Mary talked about empathy, and it's really important that people listen to what other people are saying and try to affirm what they're saying, whether they agree or not. And uncovering assumptions. So that's in terms of bias, in terms of stereotyping, understanding that we all come to conversations with assumptions and with biases. And if you teach negotiation, you know, we talk a lot about biases that come up in negotiation, and they come up really in all conversations. So one of the things I'd like to say is that these 3 processes, growth mindset, microaffirmations, and dialogue, are the same 3 processes that I think are essential for inclusive collaboration. So I have collaborated with people on different continents. As an African-American female, of course, a lot of my colleagues are not of the same demographic group as I am. And so my collaborations are always kind of cross boundary. But I think the thing that really brings us together, and Tony's one of my collaborators, so he can confirm this, is that we have this superordinate category, right? So we see ourselves first and each other first as scholars with something to contribute. And yes, we recognize that we may not be in the same demographic categories, but that inclusive academy identity is strong. We have a growth mindset, right? And you need a growth mindset when you're working particularly with doctoral students, right? Because you're there to mentor them. They're not going to get it perfect in their first year, in their first attempt. And, you know, kind of the pride of us as mentors is watching them grow. Micro affirmations, trying to see our colleagues as they are and in their wholeness. And I think the pandemic has really gotten us as collaborators, since we're all collaborating from home now, to see each other very fully with all the other aspects of our lives that often run by behind our screen. And then having dialogue, right? And you know that when you're working on a project, I work on a lot of theory papers, when one person wants to go in a different direction, there is a dialogue about what are the assumptions you're making? What are the assumptions in the paper? Why are we moving this way? Is this, you get responses to reviewers and you're, thinking, and you might both think to answer it in a different way, right? It's a dialogue that brings you to the place where you decide which direction to go. So I think so I love these three. I would love feedback about kind of what you think of them, how you think about including them in your classroom. I want to give an example of growth mindset. I talked about this with people who taught accounting, who taught economics. And I asked them, how is that included in your classroom? And they talked about having assignments where these aren't graded, but the more practice they have, the more they're improved. And I talk about this every week about how this practice helps you improve in making doing these economic problems. And so it's something that we can build into the way we plan our assignments, right? The idea that you have a draft and then you have a final copy. That's suggesting a growth mindset, that your first attempt isn't just you're either good or bad at this and feedback won't help you, right? So we can build it into our assignments. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about is, even if you have a growth mindset, you're using affirmations and your students are using affirmations, when it comes to having dialogue about difficult topics, right, that come up in the news constantly, other people are likely to say things that are going to trigger you, that you disagree with, that are very emotion laden. And what do you do? And so the last thing I wanted to present was just a model from the University of Michigan. It's on their website, and you can also find it on my website to download. It's called the LARA model, and it has 4 steps. So it stands for listen, affirm, respond, and add. And this is a way to slow down that dialogue so you're not just reacting and lashing out at people or behaving in a defensive way. So you listen to what they say, and affirm means you, in active listening, you're reflecting back to them what they said and their intention behind it. And this doesn't mean you agree with what they've said. It means that you're doing that stage of kind of microaffirmation of saying that, you hear them. Then you respond. And then you may add additional information, or you may ask and inquire. And so this is a very powerful process in any type of conflict resolution, but particularly when you're trying to stay in a dialogue and move that along to get to uncover assumptions. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'll stop. Please feel free to reach out and contact me by email or phone. And if you go to inclusion.guide, I have some of the articles and information on that page for you to download. And I will upload the slides. I haven't done that yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Mary. These are really insightful, very useful lessons and also advice we can use. I think I'm gonna borrow some of the ideas for my own work over here to promote diversity, equity, inclusion here at USF.
Tony, can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
The thing I forgot to say is all of these processes, if you know me, are things that build trust. And so that's one of the things I love about them too. So, so definitely trust is in there, but in terms of the outcome of these processes.
Michele is also an expert on intergroup relations. So you can see a lot of ideas from her research in the slides. Really wonderful advice. I will talk with you offline as well, about some of the things that we can do in terms of promoting institutional excellence. Katina?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Can you all see that? Awesome. Okay, so thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for being here. So Christian and I touched base before this presentation and decided to sort of divide up the two areas because he and I are primary collaborators. And so the work that he's going to talk about in terms of building inclusive collaborations, I'm a co-author on that work too. So we thought maybe we would split these things up, and I'm going to focus on classrooms specifically, and then he's going to follow up and focus on some of the stuff that we've done in collaborations. So I'm going to talk through a little bit around tips and tricks that I've learned over time that seem to help promote an inclusive classroom environment specifically. So just a little bit about my teaching background so you know where I'm coming from. I've been teaching classes as the instructor of record for over a decade now, which sounds so strange to say, but I have a dual degree in psychology and women's studies from Penn State. And so as a graduate student, my graduate assistantships were in both psychology and in gender and women's studies. And the very first class that I ever taught was Intro to Women's Studies in a lecture hall with over 100 students. I was 24 years old, and being thrown into having dialogues in a huge group setting with students about all different types of topics that are quite controversial, right? Everything from welfare programs to reproductive rights to diversity in organizations. It really ran the gamut. And it was a really good way for me to learn and start off understanding how to create dialogues that actually work. And I certainly made a lot of mistakes in the beginning in terms of the way that I structured those dialogues, and also, you know, making sure that students were following and coming along with me, as opposed to creating an environment where I'm here and you're there and your job is to come meet me where I'm at, right? So I've learned a lot with regard to how to set up those environments effectively, which I'm going to talk about. Moving forward from that introductory experience, I taught the psychology of gender and sexuality at the undergraduate and graduate level for 7 years in my previous job. And then at GW now for the last 4 years, I've been teaching diversity and globalization in organizations, both to undergraduates and to graduate students. So I've taught a lot of classes that have this kind of content, but I also weave this content into other courses that I teach, like strategic human resource management, which I've taught to MBAs and masters in HR students. I've taught both very large and very small classes, so anywhere from 5 students all the way up to over 100, as I just mentioned, at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And I've taught both in person and virtually. So I'm going to try to give some things that I find that work across environments, because I know a lot of us are struggling with how to translate some of these concepts to a virtual classroom as well. So I'm going to talk about 6 steps that I think help create an inclusive classroom. I was going through my syllabi over the years and some of my teaching evaluations and looking to see what are some of the things that stood out to students that they seem to latch onto as being particularly inclusive or effective in the classes. And so I sort of boiled them down to 6 things that I'm going to present here that students seem to appreciate. So the first thing is setting ground rules. At the beginning of every semester, I work with the students to try to set some ground rules for the class. We set aside a decent amount of dedicated time in the beginning of the first class to decide what it is that we want to create as an environment together. So what's the environment that we'd like to co-create for learning? And it's a participative process. So I have them sort of engage with the idea of why ground rules are important for ensuring that we have an agreement about the kind of environment that we're striving towards. And so if we can all agree that this is the environment we want to create, then if things stray from that environment, we can use the ground rules as a way to bring us back to something that we commonly understand as being an effective place for our class to be, both in the learning environment, but also outside of the classroom in discussion boards and things of that nature. So we really want to ensure that we're creating a participative environment where people feel comfortable sharing. And some of the common ground rules that come out of those conversations are things like, you know, we should really wait until someone is done talking before we jump in to share an idea. So oftentimes, as we all know, students get excited when we're having a dialogue that has something to do with topics that they're passionate about. And so waiting until someone's done talking can be a really helpful way to make sure everybody feels included and not stepped over. We also know that students who identify with, you know, whatever the minority group might be or groups might be within your particular university context are more likely to be talked over than majority group students. assuming positive intentions without allowing for inappropriate or damaging comments. So of course, as an instructor, you don't want to, create an environment where people say inappropriate, damaging, or harassing things in the classroom and you let that go because you're assuming they meant well. But the idea that if someone says something that could be interpreted in one of multiple ways, right? That we try to assume that the person meant it in the most positive way possible, instead of jumping on that person and assuming that they meant to say something that was harmful. So going back to what Michele was just talking about around dialogue, how do we support a dialogue where, in the absence of clear evidence that this was a comment that was harassing, derogatory, et cetera, what can we do to try to push people towards having a clearer understanding of how to have an inclusive dialogue, because they feel like they're welcomed into that dialogue and can make their way to a more perfect, while none of us are ever perfect, which I'm going to talk about in a second, way of having these dialogues, right? That there is an ability to have a learning curve. And sometimes that can't happen if people assume that you're coming at it with a negative intentionality, if that's not accurate. Being mindful that consensus may not always be reached, but respect must always be present. So we may not always agree. You think about issues related to gender equity, racial equity, within communities of racial and ethnic minorities, or within groups of women, right? There's a lot of discrepancy about opinions of how we get to a place of equity, for example. And so those dialogues can happen. We may not ever get to a place in the class where we all agree. And so letting the students know that it's possible that we may end a class where there are different perspectives that are represented and we're not all going to congeal around one viewpoint helps us to accept that and not make it so that the class can't rest until we get to that point, right? So these are things that students often bring up. If they don't bring them up, sometimes I'll suggest them or bring something up that's similar. But I do have them go into breakout groups in a virtual setting. Usually in the classroom, I would have them have small group dialogues as well around what do we think has helped to create positive classroom environments in the past, and they'll take some notes and then we all feed them forward. And then what I do is I post those ground rules. We use Blackboard, but whatever your online system is, as the class agreement. These are the ground rules that we agreed on, and we can always revisit those. And sometimes every now and again, students will email and ask to revisit those. So that's kind of how I kick off the class, with an understanding of what we all want to have as our learning environment. I like to use this idea of calling people in. So a lot of times these topics are intimidating for students to weigh in on, especially for undergraduate students. They may never have had a conversation about some of these topics or ideas before. They may never have had to work in groups with people who look different from them. And so it can be sometimes easier to be reticent and not participate than to actually share. And so one of the ways that I like to get the class started is by doing a pre-class survey to try to understand their needs and desires for the class. This is also a good place to ask people if they have a name that they'd like you to use that's not what you have on your class roster. If I ask about pronouns in the pre-class survey, and anything else that they'd like to tell you. This gives me a good sense coming into the class of what the students are looking to get out of the class and any concerns that they might have, so that as I'm starting to create that learning environment, that's on my radar, and I can add things into the course or the way I'm facilitating the course to address some of those concerns that students might have. I also think it's important to take time to learn about students at the start of the class and throughout the semester, especially during the course of the pandemic. And, with Black Lives Matter hitting a crescendo in the summer of 2020 during the pandemic, students had a lot going on. And one of the things that I implemented, especially because they were virtual and I didn't feel like I was able to see them the same way that I could see them in the classroom and how they're processing information, I gave them a journal option so that they had an open journal that they could write to me, anything that they wanted to write or share. Of course, I shared with them, the legalities around if you share certain things, I have to share them, and that whole aspect of it. But this is a place for you to just tell me what you've got going on. And I would check that once a week, and not everybody did it, or not even the majority did it, but some students really liked that, just keeping me posted about what they had going on in their lives. And it helped me to understand, hey, this student comes in every week and they don't seem as participative, or they always have their camera off, for example. It helped me to understand why that might be, right? In a way that I wouldn't necessarily know if I was just in the classroom with them and not hearing from them outside the class. I also have them put together a class playlist. So in this pre-class survey, I asked them either what was their favorite song growing up or what's currently their favorite song. It sounds silly, but in the very first class, we talk about the concept of inclusion. And I talked to them about how a lot of people say inclusion is not just being invited to the party, but being asked to dance. And that I think that's okay, but you're still dancing to my music, right? So what I would like is for a party to be actually representative of what everybody brings to the table, so that if one person wasn't at the party, it would actually change the fabric of what the party is. And so I asked them, in order to start our party as a semester, if we could start a playlist that actually represents everyone in the class. And as I'm bringing students into class, I have, for the first 5 minutes leading up to when I kick the class off, I have one of their songs playing, and it creates a nice environment. The students will put in the chat like, hey, this is my song, whatever. And other students are like, I love that song. So it's kind of a fun thing. It sounds silly, but it actually does help create some community, and it works pretty well in a virtual environment. I've done it in classroom before too. Letting people know that you're happy they're there regardless of the reason. So sometimes people sign up for your class because they didn't want to get up early and it's at 4 p.m., right? So we can assume that our students are all in these types of classes because they're passionate about the topic, but sometimes it's not that at all. So I let them know, I want to know why you're here in the pre-class survey. I want to know what you want to get out of it. But honestly, if you're just here because it was credits and it works for you, I'm glad you're here. Let's all join together and try to figure out a way to move through this class and grow as a community together from where we all are. And it's okay what your starting point is. I also try to emphasize that often when we have these conversations, things can come up that people feel uncomfortable about from their past. Like they can feel like, oh my gosh, I did this thing 5 years ago, and now I realize that that was completely off base, or I said this thing to this person, I feel horrible about it. It's not about your past. It's important to reflect on your past. But what we're trying to do in this classroom is a new way of thinking and seeing the world. So regardless of where you're coming at this conversation from, let's try to all focus on the goal of saying, how can we see the world differently from here on out, and try to avoid some of the things that maybe we don't feel so great about from before. So I try not to get students too hung up on that. Just as Michele talked about cultivating a growth mindset, making it clear that no one knows all the answers, even you. I try to say as much as possible, like, I'm learning so much from you this semester. Here's something new that I learned this semester that I didn't know before. Wow, I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, that really taught me something, right? Because it does, but unless you make it clear to them that that's what you're thinking, they don't always know. So cultivating a growth mindset that you're learning, raising personal examples of times when you have fallen short and what you did to make up for it. So everybody makes missteps in DEI conversations, right? And so it's important for you sometimes to role model that. I know Dolly Chug's book, The Person You Mean to Be, talks a lot about that, right? That it's important to take ownership over your own shortcomings, but also share them with people so they feel comfortable that if they're not 100% at these things yet, that's okay. They can still keep moving forward and growing. It's not a sign that they should stop engaging. Treating the class as a starting point and using shared goals and values as a way to work through emotions or conversations. So, you know, recognizing that we all have room to grow and saying, like, this is what we're striving towards, but we're not there yet. And if we were there, we wouldn't need this class. We wouldn't need these conversations, right? So I talk a lot about this is a starting point of a dialogue about something. And I think that helps sometimes to set an environment of, okay, we're just at the beginning. We don't need to be all the way at the end yet. I can ask questions, or I can recognize that I don't know all the answers. I try to frame around how to instead of who's who. What I mean by that is when I make the modules for my class, I make them as how to achieve gender equity in organizations, how to achieve racial equity in organizations. Instead of saying, you know, these individuals in the class are responsible for this, 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 and this in society, which is, I do say that in a way, but I try not to pin it on certain students, like these students in the class probably understand this, or those students in the class probably understand that. Because I really don't know the details of all my students' lives and all the identities that they hold, right? So I try to be as clear as possible that this is a skill that anybody can learn, and that even folks that have, you know, marginalized identities within the space might have blind spots around other types of identities, right? So I try to make it clear that we're all learning regardless of where we're starting from. And I also allow for assignment redos for partial credit back for every assignment that they do over the course of the semester. This is extremely masochistic from a grading perspective. I don't know that I would recommend it, but I like them to think about their learning as a journey and not as a you got a bad grade, shove it in your backpack and never look at it again. I like them to think about it as, okay, you didn't do well on this. Let's talk about it. You could redo it and get a better grade next time around. And as long as you're on the clock with me, then let's keep learning and growing, and you could be rewarded for that learning and growth. So I try to model that even in the way the course is set up. I try to role model perspective taking. I have them do reflection papers ongoing throughout the course of the semester. Another vantage point for me to learn what they're going through, how they're processing the course material. I recognize that students are facing a lot of challenges. I try to be flexible and adaptable, especially in the last 2 years, like students that need extensions or have family issues going on or things like that. I try to be as flexible and adaptable as possible without having it be a free-for-all. But if students are struggling with something, I really think that it's best for their learning to meet them where they're at and say, okay, you're an adult, let me try to figure out a solution with you so that you can still learn the material, but do it in a way that actually supports your wellness. I discuss factors that went into my decision-making about any course changes or updates. So if I'm going to make a change to their class, or I try to give them a lot of background on why I'm doing that. And I often base that around mid-semester feedback. So I always gather mid-semester feedback, and I try to be responsive to that feedback and tell them, I've read your feedback and here's what I'm going to do to respond. I try to facilitate challenging but inviting dialogue. I use a lot of breakout rooms for activities with classmates, but I always make sure that we have a lot of time to debrief those activities. I don't want to kind of leave them hanging with a conversation that was tense or problematic. I let the students know it's okay to ask questions of me or of the group, but I also do some work to say, please try not to overburden specific students with questions about their particular group in the breakout groups. So if you have questions, you might pose them to the entire group and see who wants to respond. But please try not to make it overly challenging for students with marginalized identities in the class to be responding to those questions specifically in the breakout groups. And then finally, I encourage students to recognize their blind spots, trying to listen and learn from others and to apply what they learn in an inclusive way with others. So a lot of self-reflection, thinking about how you're entering those conversations. And the last is I try to replenish their resources when I can. So I provide consistent breaks in the class. I know that these dialogues are tough. They need some time away from the screen. Often the students say that was really good time for me to reflect, and I came back to the next part of the class with a little bit of a different mindset. I allow for camera usage to vary. I don't make cameras required. I know that students often would like, especially if they know they're going to a class where they're going to be discussing a topic that might be tough for them, to have the option to enter without camera on and turn it on as they want to. Using media to break things up. So a lot of videos and things like that to provide a respite from the lecture. And I'm always available to talk about the course and any issues that might be arising. So I'm very quick to respond to them, etc. And the last is the final class meeting that we have. I do a retreat for them, which is like mindfulness meditation, self-reflection, self-exploration. And we come together as a class to sort of reflect on the entirety of the class. And they end up with like a series of journal entries that help them to set action steps for how they're going to move forward and apply this information in their lives. And then they're free to share how they want. So those are my tips. If you have any questions, there's my email address. You can always connect with me with LinkedIn. And thank you so much for your time.
Super energetic. I love it. Thank you so much, Katina. All right, for the time's sake, let's move on to Christian, and then we will have a dialogue. I mean, you might notice there's a common word among all of them. It's dialogue. So we will have our own dialogue at the end.
All right. Morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be a part of this SCENE panel to contribute to this really important discussion that we're having this morning. So again, my name is Christian Thoroughgood. I'm an assistant professor of management at the Robinson College of Business here at Georgia State University. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to build inclusive research collaborations when conducting research with marginalized populations. So as Katina talked about before, we are primary research collaborators and really have been conducting a lot of work on the LGBTQ+ community for about 9 years or so. So basically the purpose of this presentation here is to kind of give you a little bit more information about and insights and potential steps for approaching how to collaborate with marginalized communities in your own. So just a little bit of background information. As I mentioned before, we've been kind of working with the LGBTQ+ community, again, for about 9 years, and specifically in relation to the trans community. So much of our research has been conducted at the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference since about 2013. This is the largest free trans-specific health conference in the world. So this is, really in the last 5 years, just been exponentially expanding in size. When we started out in 2013, there were I think, around 3,000 participants, and now it's kind of ballooned into 7,000 plus individuals who attend this conference. So these are members of the trans community across a wide range of gender identities along the trans spectrum. It also includes family members, oftentimes, parents of children who are identifying along the continuum and trying to sort of better support them through attending workshops and various health-related, information sessions and so forth. And it also includes allies. So a lot of the discussion sessions and workshops and activities are really oriented around how to promote better allyship, both in the workplace and also in non-workplace settings. So again, really the purpose sort of at the heart of the Trans Wellness Conference is really this mission to educate and empower trans individuals and also their allies to better promote the health and well-being of the community. And so just to give you a little bit of sense of kind of what our process is, we've been attending annually. Obviously, the pandemic has really thrown a wrench in the conference's plans over the past couple of years. But typically what we do is we attend and rent out a booth, or sometimes we get 2 booths, and we take students with us. We take other collaborators on our projects with us to the conference. And we interact with conference attendees. We bring computers, we have set up surveys, so all of our Qualtrics surveys are accessible to participants. And basically we just collect data, whether that be survey data or interview data and so forth. So one thing I just really want to emphasize here is that there's a really strong interactive component to the data collections. It isn't, mostly that participants are just sitting down and taking a survey. They're really wanting to share their experiences. And so this really provides kind of a really important, as I'll talk about here in a second, an opportunity to really embed yourself, become immersed, and connect with the community at a much deeper and more meaningful level. Okay, so one of the important things that I wanted to emphasize just right off the bat is when you're conducting research with marginalized populations, to sort of really cultivate this mindset around inclusive collaboration is so very important. And it's important, number one, for your research in terms of, number one, quality of data. Are you asking the right questions that are not only theoretically interesting, but obviously, are they relevant to the community? Are they important and relevant to the issues and challenges that community members view as pressing and informative to their needs and advancing their interests and concerns? Point B is that it's also really important to your own personal development as a person, as a researcher, as I'll get into here in a second, and also to your relationships with a given community. Michele had really, emphasized at the end of her presentation this notion of trust, and when it comes to, building collaborative relationships with marginalized populations, your relationship is very much important to this process, obviously. And this is because, justifiably so, there is a lot of skepticism when outsiders are kind of coming into a community and wanting to collect data, write up research results. There are often questions about, what are the ulterior motives here potentially? Why are these researchers kind of coming in and why are they interested in studying us? Oftentimes a really important concern is, are they going to be competent enough to accurately represent our experiences in their research? One of the overriding things, though, that we find in just our attendance at the conference is that folks want to be heard. So there, especially within the transgender community, has just been, a lot of neglect of the population in the scientific literature, and especially within the IO, OB, and management literatures. We have seen in recent years kind of much more of an increase in that work. But what our experiences have been at the conference is that people just want to tell their stories. They want to be heard, they want to be represented in the literature, and they also want to see how that research is contributing to potential real world practical applications and outcomes that better their lives in organizations. And so, in kind of preparing for this presentation, Katina and I had kind of tossed around some ideas about, what were perhaps maybe some best practices that we've learned over the years. This definitely is not an exhaustive list of, things that we've probably learned, but I think these are really some key points that also hit on some prior presentations that you've heard today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about assembling an inclusive research team, inclusive sampling via community connection efforts, training an inclusive research team, using respectful and inclusive research practices, mixing qualitative and quantitative methods to better represent participants' experiences, and then in turn, following up with participants post-data collection and study write-up. Okay. So the first really important thing, and Michele had talked about this a little bit before, but just to kind of expand on a little bit more, is that you want to ensure that your research team is as representative as possible with respect to community members being on your team. So obviously this can be really difficult, again, because we do a lot of work in the transgender community, being a very small population and also being a highly stigmatized population still in society with concealable identities. It can be really difficult to find collaborators in your field that are sort of willing to participate and work on a collaborative project. So point being right from the beginning is that this is really difficult to do. We have been successful in recent years in doing this, but it really took a lot of time. And so you want to try to make those efforts as much as possible. And this is important for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it really aids in the study idea development phase. As we all know, when researchers are not a part of a given marginalized community, they can bring certain biases, certain assumptions into the research process, and specifically in the initial stages of the process, when you're thinking about what are your research questions, what are the hypotheses that you're going to derive, and those biases, those assumptions can creep into the process in a way that obviously can harm community members and really misrepresent their experiences within the research literature. And so when you bring in members of the population onto your research team, this can really help in terms of providing a safeguard to ensure that your study ideas are not only theoretically interesting, but also, again, answer important questions and tackle important issues that are relevant to the community and accurately represent their experiences. The second piece of that, so I would really say in the research process, that initial development ideas is obviously going to drive the remainder of your projects. But when we get into the manuscript preparation phase, this is really where it's helpful to have members of the community on your projects, because they provide, again, kind of that mechanism to assure that you're really representing ideas that come out of the research in ways that stay true to the community and also to their experiences. Okay. Inclusive sampling via communication, community connection efforts. Again, this is really difficult to do, especially when we're talking about highly marginalized populations. But if possible, again, it's really important to potentially access real world venues for your data collection efforts. We've been fortunate enough to, be able to, over the years, collect data at the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference, but there are certainly other conferences in which you might be able to connect with the community at, again, a deeper, more interactive and direct level, such as Out and Equal. Katina probably, can tell you a little bit more about her volunteer and outreach experiences in the past. and connection to local communities and doing ethnography. So maybe she can talk about that here in a second. But point being here is that there's a lot of chances and opportunities to connect more directly with a community and conduct your data collections at a more intimate level. Now, this is really important because when you're collecting data through a community more directly, number one, is really important, obviously, to your own personal development as an individual and also as a researcher and a DEI researcher specifically. So obviously we know a lot from the contact literature and contact theory that immersing yourself in and having one-on-one conversations with community members can have a wide range of beneficial outcomes. So number one, it provides greater understanding of group-specific issues, challenges. It promotes perspective taking and empathy. And this can really help in turn to help you challenge your own personal biases and assumptions, as Katina mentioned before, that we all bring to the table in one way, shape, or form and into the research process, specifically when we're conducting this type of work. As Michele and Katina also mentioned, trust is really important here as well. And if I could point to one kind of key outcome of all of these inclusion efforts, it really is trust. When you make the effort to connect with and learn from community members, and again, that really intimate, direct way, you can demonstrate more that you really truly care about their welfare and issues. And so this is something that's really emerged over the years in conducting our data collections at the conference. Folks, again, kind of bring some skepticism. They'll see surveys oftentimes online and not necessarily know who those researchers are, who they are and what their intentions are. And so being able to kind of connect with the community again at that more intimate level is important to clarifying your motivations for people to get to know you. We all often have a lot of participants who are coming back year and year to participate in our work. So we know them. We're pretty embedded within that community at this point where they feel that they can trust us. The last important thing that I think really helps in terms of conducting these kind of on-site field data collections is that it can really contribute to promoting more inclusive methodology on the part of, on your part as a researcher. So we've seen a lot over the years, like, when we first attended the conference, our demographic sections were actually, pretty thin, and especially questions around gender identity. If you're familiar with this community, the terminology is constantly changing around pronouns and different gender identity terms. And so we've been fortunate to really get a lot of direct feedback from the community on site, on the fly, about the surveys that we conduct, and really expanding out the pronouns section to make sure it's as inclusive as possible. So this is not what you get when you conduct data collections online. You could certainly obtain it if you have an open-ended question section at the end of your survey, but it's really helpful when you can hear it from participants' mouths, when they can really give you a sense of how your survey is functioning on the fly. It can kind of do a lot of good in terms of improving the inclusiveness of the methodologies that you utilize in the process. People want to have voice in that process, and they want to give you information that makes your surveys more inclusive. Training an inclusive research team. So I think, one of the important things to remember is that you can't assume that when you bring new research collaborators, and especially students, master's or PhD students onto projects, that they're necessarily going to have the required or basic background, especially if they're conducting these types of field data collections, to interact with community members. So I just want to say right off the bat, we're not saying that folks need to have an elaborate understanding, but they need to have basic knowledge. And so typically what we'll do, especially with students that we've brought to the conference in prior years to help and aid in data collections, is to have kind of a working session, to have sort of an opportunity to discuss the importance of inclusive language, such as gender pronouns and different gender identity terms, to talk about group-specific issues such as gender transitions, gender-neutral dress codes, and bathroom access issues that often come up in discussions of workplace issues, which primarily are going to be discussed, during our types of data collections, because folks want to talk about their experiences. And so you have to be sort of prepared for that. And, we've had students who are 20, 21, 22, 23 years of age, and maybe they haven't had a lot of exposure to this community in the past. And so it's important to sort of build that basic kind of cognitive framework to have those types of conversations and to be good active listeners. And so that kind of gets to the second point here, is that, hopefully, you have research assistants that really bring to the table that growth mindset that we've talked about in prior presentations, and learning orientation. So really what we found is that the most inclusive collaborations, the best conferences that we've attended in the past have been ones in which our students really brought to their discussions and interactions with community members that learning orientation. And to emphasize to them that this is an opportunity to really become immersed, to gain exposure with a population that maybe they haven't had a lot of exposure to in the past. One of the things that we do emphasize, in kind of preparing for the conference, is not asking invasive questions, but being a good listener, being an active listener. Because again, folks want to have those conversations. They want to discuss their experiences beyond what we ask them in the survey. And this is really important to your research team's self-development and to promoting those more meaningful, trusting interactions and relationships with community members.
Christian, for the time's sake, I suggest we post the remaining slides on the website. And I will just leave 10 minutes for the dialogue among the audience. Would you be okay with that?
That's totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. So everyone, so now it's time for us to have a dialogue. If you have a question, comments, insights, or ideas, please feel free to type your comments in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. I can call your name and can turn on camera. Again, this is an informal dialogue. Every one of us are learning about how to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, not only in our research, but also in classrooms. So we would love to hear your insights, and then Mary, Michelle, Katina, and Christian can answer your question if you have any, or if you have any suggestions. I'm pretty sure everyone wanna hear that as well.
I see Karim has his hand up, Tony.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Christian, to be honest. Next semester, I'm going to teach a course on diversity. That's the reason why I also signed up for here, so I could learn something for this course. And I have read a lot of scientific articles concerning diversity because of me teaching the course in the coming semester. And my question is the following. Scientific articles which analyze the transgender aspect or the aspect of gender identity often do it from the lens or the dimension of sexual orientation. And my question is, do you think that this transgender aspect and this gender identity aspect should continue to be analyzed from the lens of sexual orientation, or should it be analyzed in the context of gender when we talk about men and women? Because gender identity and sexual orientation is not the same thing.
Yeah, so I think that you kind of answered the question in your last point there, is that, and one of the things that I was going to emphasize, at the end of the presentation there, is that we see a lot of, for example, survey measures that confuse gender identity and sexual orientation. And so I think that the two definitely need to be separable. I think that, and Katina can sort of expand on this as well, is that, frame your discussions around maybe gender identity or sexual orientation first, and then switch to the other discussion. So yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Thank you very much.
So Karen, maybe I have a question like for you, like how would you structure your course? I mean, since you're assigned to this course, like what is your idea? Because like a lot of us are trying to develop a course on that topic. What would you, what are you thinking based on your own research and also your plan?
What I would do is like, I would start with generally what is diversity. And I would like to start with how does like judgment cognitively get into the minds of people. That's how I would start, like very general. And then I would like to do groups, and every group I would give like one dimension that they should do a presentation on, like gender or like age or like disability and everything like that. And I am still not sure if I want a specific group on being transgender, the transgender aspect, or if I want to put this aspect into the sexual orientation group or into the regular gender group. I'm still not clear about it myself because, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I don't know if this is a good answer. I'm so sorry. But that's what I thought about, like one group for every dimension.
Sure. So Michele provided website, Katina provided address. Like there are good resources. I go to them as well. So like you have the resources now. Anybody else? I mean, feel free to share your comments, suggestions. Your question probably is a lot of us. So we have the same questions probably. Okay, Randy, thank you. Randy, do you have any questions or do you have any personal experience you would like to share?
Well, I just want to say that this is something that I'm at the University of Georgia in the Terry College of Business, but this is an area that I'm working on very, really consistently to help our faculty learn to be more inclusive in their coursework. And for the first time, we actually developed a training for the faculty, and we recorded it, and it's available for new faculty as they come on board. So we found that to be helpful. But, you know, I would just continue to encourage people to attend events like this, because this is so helpful. I'm getting additional resources, and I really look forward to kind of circling back and reading a lot of these documents.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
I mean, I'm pretty sure all of us are curious about how your institutions do in promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, because this is a big initiative. I would say at least in the entire United States, you can see many universities are doing something to make a difference. What about folks from international background, like, or from other countries? Do you have any experience to share, or what would you do in your own country? I don't know how many people are from international outside the United States, but like this probably is a big issue for other countries as well. Is there any other insights you can share with us?
I'm happy to mention my experience teaching in Taiwan, Tony, but I think Sabrina had her hand up.
Go ahead. Sabrina, go ahead.
Thanks. So my question was not about that in any way.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I had a question. So I've revamped. So I teach organizational behavior, and I have been thinking about inclusion and anti-racist pedagogy in alignment with our kind of new, I guess, stated institutional values. And so my question is about the idea of the practices, but not necessarily in a course that is dedicated to DEI. So like, you know, OB is kind of a breadth course, but one of the things that I've been trying to do is I've changed the dynamic in the class where the students take control of the class, the students teach the content and things. And so I've been trying to infuse this idea of we can build similar to Katina's like agreement. So I have an activity where we do this, but it has been this really interesting tension of stepping back because the students are supposed to control the course, and then but kind of like all the emotions that we've been talking about that we're trying to deal with, kind of like also being in their hands and trying to figure out where this balance is. So my question is about kind of structures and processes that might be outside of the specific DEI discussions, but that help us to understand like organizational process that gets us to the kinds of inclusion, anti-racist, in my case, outcomes or experiences that we're trying to promote and kind of, help train our future leaders to knowing how to do.
So Sabrina, I'd love to jump in, Tony, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that we have here at the University of Iowa are DEI ambassadors. And so I was thinking, for your course, one of the things that, so they are people who are trained and dedicated and care about DEI, but also at Cornell, they had discussion leaders. So in terms of these types of discussions, we train students. So they went through the course. So kind of students who go through your course, they could then come back and you could train the discussion leaders. So we had a separate course for the student facilitators so that they've gone through it, they've experienced it, and then they come back to help facilitate these discussions for other students, because without that extra level of facilitation training that you could provide kind of outside of your classroom at the more structural level of the college, it is hard for them to handle the emotions that come up. The other thing that is very common in intergroup courses is that there's always two facilitators for a group, and one from the target group and one from the agent group, and they work together, and so that they can model the conversation for the students. And then also if one gets triggered, the other person can step in. And so they really model, kind of that whole process, including that we are going to experience emotions and we're real people. We're not like these perfect facilitators. So I don't know if something like that might work in your course.
Thank you. So for the time's sake, I would say we will continue the conversation. So this is the first year we tried this session on inclusive collaboration in classrooms. And next year we are planning to do a similar session, and probably we will have new techniques and new approaches to address this issue. I think it's a continuous conversation. We don't want to make it a one-off. So if you have any suggestions or ideas about how to have a more meaningful, more constructive, and some topics you would like to cover in the session, please let me know. And I will convey your message to the OB Division Executive Committee and also our Making Connections Committee. Again, we want to make sure our OB Division is inclusive. Everybody, regardless of your background or countries or your gender or race, you will feel included in the division. So this is a really good initiative. That's why I'm fully supportive of this initiative for our division. Thank you so much for being here. And hopefully this is a good use of your time this morning. Or if you're in other country, probably your evening or afternoon. But thank you so much for being here. I'm very glad to see all of you here. Bye-bye, and keep in touch.
Bye, thanks.